How to delete the recovery partition in Windows 10? I need to convert the disk containing my operating system to a dynamic disk from a basic disk. Unfortunately, there is no room on the disk to convert the drive from basic to dynamic. Microsoft documents the problem and notes the solution is to delete the last partition on the disk. Not enough space available to upgrade to a dynamic disk. Resolution. Start Disk Manager, right-click the last partition, and then click Delete Partition. Note, I don't need a reason to ask my question. But if anyone would refuse to answer the question unless I give a justification, there one is. It's important to note that this recovery partition didn't come from an OEM. The recovery partition was created when Windows 7 Retail was cleanly installed on the PC. Bonus question: why did Windows 7 create a recovery partition? Bonus question: how do you create or recreate a recovery partition on a hard drive that does not have one? Fortunately, I don't have to back anything up from this recovery partition, since Windows says it is empty. Except the directions on Microsoft support don't work, there is no option to delete the recovery partition. Microsoft says you can use the Create Recovery drive to delete a recovery partition. From Create a USB recovery drive, which is used to create a USB recovery drive, there is supposed to be an option at the end of the wizard to delete the recovery partition on the hard drive. When the process is done, do one of the following. If you want to keep the recovery partition on your PC, tap or click Finish. If you want to remove the recovery partition from your PC and free up disk space, tap or click Delete the recovery partition. Then tap or click Delete. This will free up the disk space used to store your recovery image. When the removal is done, tap or click Finish. Note: some PCs don't offer the option to remove a recovery partition. If you experience this, there isn't a recovery partition on your PC that's using additional disk space. When I complete the wizard, there isn't offered the option to remove a recovery partition. Which apparently means that my machine doesn't have a recovery partition, yet I refer you to. Which causes the questions. Do I have a recovery partition? Why does Windows say that I do? Why does Windows say that I don't? Why did Windows create the recovery partition in the first place? Why is the recovery partition empty? Why does Windows not let a user delete a recovery partition? The problem I'm actually trying to solve is how do I convert the disk to dynamic, without reinstalling Windows, of course. Discard. I tried using discard from an elevated command prompt.
There is plenty of space on the disk. You are getting this error for a different reason. If your machine is anything but a desktop, then you would get the error you have. This URL. You aren't able to delete the recovery partition because it's EFI protected. You should be able to force by using the override command. This URL v equals ws.10 asks. I would try using diskpart from an elevated command prompt to delete the partition. After that, you should be able to convert to dynamic disk. Usually I repurpose drives so I don't worry about data loss, but back up your data and use a desktop.
Option 1. Deleting a recovery partition using diskpart. Start menu, search for diskpart, right-click, select, open file location, right-click on diskpart.x, and select Run as administrator. Type list disk and press enter, then select disk X. X is your disk containing your recovery drive, and press enter, then list partition, then select partition X. X is your recovery partition, and then delete partition override. If you get delete is not allowed on the current boot, system, page file, crash dump or hibernation volume. Go to option 2. Option 2. Using a third-party partition manager. Try something like ECS Free Partition Manager. If the option to delete partition isn't in the context menu, go to option 3. Option 3. Using Disk Manager to shrink the recovery partition and merge the extra space with the main partition. This doesn't directly answer the question but provide a workaround to recover the space used by the recovery partition. Mine was taking 20 GB, only 9 GB used, and I could shrink it to 415 MB. Go to Create and Format Hard Drive Partition aka Disk Manager, and assign a drive letter to the recovery partition. In My Computer, open the recovery drive. If it's empty, go in Folder Options, and enable the option to show the hidden files and uncheck Hide Protected Operating System. Delete the Dell folder, about 8.7 GB. Go back, Disk Manager, shrink the recovery partition to the minimum possible and increase the mainOS partition over the released disk space and applied all changes. From Maziarcher. If you can't shrink to most of the recovery size, I could only shrink to about 2 GB even if they're more than 19 GB free, you will have to do it the hard way. Option 4. Using Ubuntu to shrink the recovery partition and merge the extra space with the main partition. This option is much longer than the previous one. You need a dual boot Ubuntu/Win10 and/or a bootable Ubuntu USB drive, a repair disk or a recovery drive for Windows 10. Make a system Windows image, just in case it really goes wrong. If you have a dual boot, back up your Ubuntu. Steps. In Ubuntu, open parted and then shrink the recovery drive and merge the extra space with the main partition. This step took about 3 hours. Reboot your computer, start Windows. You will most likely have the error 0xC00000F or the error 0xC0000225. Restart your computer from the Windows repair disk or recovery drive, open boot options and then choose CD/DVD or USB, wait for it to load and then choose your keyboard language. You can try the option, Repair Computer. I think it's in troubleshooting, and then Advanced Options, but it didn't solve the problem for me. Instead, open the command prompt and type this. Don't forget to press enter between each line. If no Windows installation is found, do this, see warning below. Warning, the first time I reboot my computer, at step 3, my recovery disk was assigned to the letter C and my Windows disk to the letter F. You can know that if you enter diskpart in the command prompt from the repair disk. I didn't proceed with the last code I gave and instead I tried the fix number 4 from here. I ended up with the An operating system wasn't found. Try disconnecting any drives that don't contain an operating system screen. I wasn't even able to get to the grub to start Ubuntu, so I started Ubuntu from the bootable USB. I use Ubuntu boot repair following all the indications it gave me. I got many error related to FlexNet and WUBI. I sort of ignored them. At this point, I was pretty sure I would have to use the Windows system image. But when I restarted, I was able to get to the grub and to choose Windows 10. I still got the 0xC0000225 error, but this time, my Windows disk had the letter C. I then entered the last code above and finally I could start Windows 10. Everything was normal in my Windows user account. If you had a dual boot, to restore Ubuntu grub, follow this. Option 5. Deleting a recovery partition by reinstalling Windows. Make a backup of your files, use a bootable Ubuntu USB drive to format and merge all the partition and then reinstall Windows. Windows creates a system files partition, but that's only 500 MB, nothing compared to the 20 GB it used before. Downside, that can be related or not to the option 4. I can't anymore create a system repair disk as the files needed are not found. I created one without problem just before shrinking the recovery drive. I need to have a window ISO from which the necessary files are loaded. I have lost all my restore points. I don't know if there is a link, but I tried to restore a restore point 2 months after deleting the recovery partition. I couldn't, some files were missing. I had others bugs, so I ended up reinstalling Windows 10 from scratch, CF option 5. I could get rid of the recovery partition during the install. Because I upgraded from Windows 7 to Windows 10 just a couple of days before doing option 4, after doing option 4, the boot displayed 2 versions of Windows, Windows 10 and 7. To remove Windows 7 from the boot menu, do this.
If you want extra support to channel, può considerarsi iscrivendo.